A wealthy man, in a fit of rage and despair, throws a briefcase into the forest. But his pet parrot, the loyal messenger of truth, follows him and goes into deep shock as it approaches the object, as if the briefcase held the echo of a betrayal it had helped uncover. The dense forest air seemed to absorb Arthur's silent scream. The briefcase, now open and disfigured, lay on the damp ground, a silent testament to his fury and blindness. Pills of all colors and sizes rolled out, mixing with the dirt and dry leaves, each one a fragment of his father's stolen health, an echo of the betrayal he had just witnessed. Rage still simmered, but an overwhelming wave of guilt and despair began to settle in. How could he have been so naive? How could he have allowed such cruelty to nest under his own roof? It was then that a rustle of wings broke the silence. Pipoca, the vibrant feathered parrot, landed a few inches from the briefcase, its claws firm on the moss. Its round, intelligent eyes, usually full of mischievous vivacity, fixed on the scattered pills. The creature, which moments before had flown with the agility of a messenger, now seemed petrified. Arthur watched, his heart heavy. Pipoca slowly approached the briefcase, its head tilted. There was no longer the frantic repetition of, "Hide the pot." Instead, the parrot let out a low sound, almost a moan, something Arthur had never heard before. Its eyes, previously merely observant, now seemed to carry a weight, an understanding that transcended simple imitation. It lightly pecked one of the pills, then recoiled, shaking its head from side to side, as if processing the extent of the malice. In that instant, Arthur felt an even greater shock than when he had caught Isabella red-handed. Pipoca wasn't just repeating words. It was comprehending the depth of what those words meant. The parrot, his loyal companion, whom he had often considered merely a pet, was the only witness who truly understood the horror of the situation. A wave of shame and gratitude flooded Arthur. The parrot, in its innocence, had been his guide, the voice of truth amidst his own darkness. With trembling hands, Arthur began to collect the medications one by one, placing them back into the briefcase. Each vial, each blister pack, was irrefutable proof. The initial rage had transformed into a cold, relentless determination. He could no longer afford the luxury of despair. His father needed him. Pipoca hopped onto Arthur's shoulder, nestling there in silence, a comforting and complicit presence. The path back to the mansion seemed longer, each step laden with the weight of the newly discovered truth. Arthur entered the house, the briefcase firmly clutched, the parrot on his shoulder, an unlikely duo of accuser and witness. Isabella was in the living room, flipping through a magazine with calculated indifference. Seeing Arthur, a forced smile appeared on her lips. "Darling, so glad you're back. I thought you'd be longer on your trip. Where have you been?" Arthur didn't answer. He walked to the coffee table and threw the briefcase down forcefully, making it spring open and spill the medications onto the polished surface. The sound echoed in the room, shattering the false serenity. Isabella's eyes widened, her face losing color. "Where have I been?" Arthur repeated, his voice low and dangerously calm. "I've been in the forest, Isabella, where I threw this after seeing you discard my father's medicine. And Pipoca, my loyal friend, followed me. He saw everything. He understood everything." Isabella tried to compose herself, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Those are just vitamins. He doesn't need so many medications. He was getting confused. "Don't lie to me," Arthur roared, his calm shattering. "I saw you, and Pipoca warned me for weeks. Hide the pot," he squawked. "You were undermining my father's health, you viper. For what? To inherit faster, to gain total control." Pipoca, as if sensing the tension, let out a loud and clear, "Hide the pot," looking directly at Isabella. The woman's face contorted in a mix of fury and despair. "He's a stupid parrot. You're crazy. I'm your wife." You were my wife, Arthur corrected, his voice again cold and cutting. Now you are a criminal. Get out of my house now, and never dare to approach my father again. Before Isabella could protest, Arthur was already calling security. His instructions short and direct. Then, with a heart heavy with remorse, he rushed to his father's room. The elderly man was weak, but alive. Arthur knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, promising that everything would be all right. Pipoca, still on his shoulder, watched the scene, the parrot's silence being the most eloquent of comforts. The charade was over. The truth, cruel and painful, had finally been revealed, and justice, though belated, would begin to be served. Arthur remained kneeling beside his father's bed, the elderly man's wrinkled hand in his. The relief of seeing him breathe, however faintly, mingled with a searing pain of guilt. How could he have been so blind, so absorbed in his own ambition, that he failed to notice the silent suffering unfolding right under his nose? Pipoca, still on his shoulder, gently pecked his ear, a gesture that, to Arthur, seemed to say, "Don't blame yourself alone. I was there." Downstairs, the sounds of security arriving echoed through the mansion. Arthur heard the firm voice of one of the guards, followed by Isabella's strident protests. "You can't do this. I'm his wife. He's crazy. It's all a misunderstanding." Her voice, once so sweet and manipulative, now sounded hysterical, devoid of any charm. Arthur squeezed his father's hand, ignoring the shouts. He couldn't afford to be distracted. His father needed him more than ever. "Please, escort her out." Arthur heard the security chief's voice, calm and professional. "And make sure she doesn't return to this property. Contact the lawyers immediately for divorce proceedings and charges of neglect and attempted murder." Arthur shuddered. Attempted murder. The gravity of the situation hit him with full force. Isabella continued to scream, her words turning into imprecations and empty threats, until the sound of the main door closing with a dull thud brought a heavy silence to the house. She was gone. With a deep sigh, Arthur picked up the phone and called Dr. Elias, the family's trusted doctor for decades. "Dr. Elias, I need you to come immediately. It's about my father. It's urgent." In less than half an hour, the doctor, a grey-haired man with a kind gaze, was already in the room, examining Arthur's father with a grave expression. Arthur watched, his heart in his throat, while Pipoca remained quiet on his shoulder like a small guardian. "He's very weak, Arthur," Dr. Elias said, his voice low. "Dehydrated, malnourished, and his medication completely unregulated. It seems that his heart and blood pressure medications were suspended or wrongly administered for a considerable time. It's a miracle he didn't have a more severe attack." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. I know, Doctor. I caught her red-handed. She was discarding the medicine." Dr. Elias sighed, shaking his head. "It's unspeakable cruelty. We'll need to hospitalize him to stabilize his medication and ensure proper nutrition. He'll need intensive care for a while." "Do whatever it takes, Doctor," Arthur replied, his voice choked. "No matter the cost, I'll be here. I won't leave him alone again." As his father was carefully prepared to be taken to the hospital, Arthur felt the weight of responsibility, but also a clarity he hadn't experienced in a long time. The mansion, once a stage for Isabella's charade, now seemed to breathe purer air. But the peace was fragile, stained by guilt and pain. Pipoca hopped from Arthur's shoulder to the windowsill, watching the ambulance drive away. The parrot said nothing, but its eyes seemed to reflect the same melancholy and determination Arthur felt. "You were the only one, Pipoca," Arthur murmured, extending his hand to the bird, which promptly nestled on his finger. "The only one who saw the truth when I was blind." The journey to justice would be long and painful. The divorce, the criminal charges, his father's recovery. Everything would demand strength and resilience. But Arthur knew he wasn't alone. He had the truth, the evidence, and, above all, the unwavering loyalty of his small, green-feathered friend. The charade was over, but the real battle, the battle for healing and redemption, was just beginning. He would do everything to make up for lost time and the suffering caused. The ambulance left, carrying with it not only his father's frail body, but also the crushing weight of Arthur's guilt. He remained at the window, watching the red and blue lights disappear into the night's darkness, feeling a chilling emptiness settle in his chest. Pipoca, still on his finger, pressed against him, a small point of warmth amidst the coldness of the now silent mansion. "Come on, Pipoca," Arthur murmured, his voice hoarse. "We have to go. He needs us." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Arthur drove at high speed, his heart pounding erratically, each traffic light seeming an eternity. Upon arrival, the medical team was already on standby, and he was directed to a waiting room while his father was taken to the intensive care unit. The following hours dragged on, filled with suffocating anxiety and a whirlwind of thoughts. He sat in an uncomfortable chair, the parrot nestled on his shoulder, its head hidden under its wing. Arthur felt like a fool, a man blinded by his own ambition and by the facade of perfection of a woman who had revealed herself to be a monster. Isabella's words, her hysterical protests and empty threats, still echoed in his mind, but now sounded pathetic, stripped of any power. Finally, Dr. Elias appeared, his face tired, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Arthur, your father is stable, but his condition is still delicate. The malnutrition and dehydration are severe, and the interruption of his heart and blood pressure medication could have been fatal. We're doing everything possible to reverse the damage. He'll need time, a lot of time, and constant care." Arthur sighed, a mix of relief and pain. "Will he recover, Doctor? Will he go back to being like before?" The doctor hesitated. "It's hard to say, Arthur. His advanced age and the time he spent in this condition. But he's a strong man. And now that he's receiving proper care, we have a good chance. The most important thing is that he's alive." "Thank you, Doctor," Arthur said, feeling tears well up again. "Please, spare no effort. I want the best specialists, the best treatments, whatever it takes. We'll do our best," Dr. Elias assured him, patting his shoulder before walking away. Arthur remained there, looking at the empty corridor. The image of his father, so fragile and vulnerable, superimposed itself on the memory of Isabella with her fake smile and calculating eyes. He had been deceived in such a cruel, complete way that the shame was almost unbearable. "Hide the pot!" Pipoca suddenly squawked, Isabella's shrill voice breaking the oppressive silence. Arthur shuddered. The sound was a vivid reminder of the truth, of the cruelty that had unfolded under his roof. He stroked the parrot's feathers. "No more, Pipoca, no more. She won't hide anything anymore." That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He spent the hours in the waiting room or on quick visits to his father's room, where the elderly man slept, connected to a series of machines. Pipoca, faithful, remained by his side, a silent guardian. The mansion, when Arthur finally returned briefly to pick up a few things, seemed different. The luxury once flaunted now seemed empty, the walls echoing Isabella's absence, but also the ghostly presence of his father's suffering. He walked through the corridors, the briefcase with the evidence and medications he had collected still vivid in his mind. The fury that had driven him to throw it into the forest, the pain of seeing the extent of the cruelty through Pipoca's eyes, all of it had been the catalyst for his blindness to be undone. Now, rage mingled with a cold determination. He called his lawyers again, his instructions more detailed and incisive. "I want her to pay for every day of suffering she caused my father. I want her to have nothing left. And I want justice to be served in an exemplary manner." The lawyer's voice, grave and professional, promised immediate action. Arthur knew the legal battle would be long and exhaustive, but he was ready. It was no longer about his ambition or his reputation. It was about his father, about the truth, and about redemption. He looked at Pipoca, who watched him with intelligent eyes. "We'll get through this, won't we, friend? We'll bring my father back, and we'll make sure she never hurts anyone again." The parrot tilted its head, and for a moment Arthur felt that the small bird understood every word. The charade was over, yes. But the real fight, the fight for healing and justice, was just beginning, and Arthur, finally awakened, was ready to face it. The days that followed were a haze of exhaustion and faint hope. Arthur established a rhythm of life between the hospital and the mansion, the latter now a mausoleum of bitter memories. His father, Mr. Eduardo, remained in the ICU, his recovery a slow and painful process. Every small improvement was celebrated with a sigh of relief. Every regression, no matter how minor, sent a chill down Arthur's spine. "He opened his eyes for a moment today, Arthur," Dr. Elias informed him one morning, while Arthur drank bitter coffee in the waiting room. "He didn't react to stimuli, but it's a sign. His body is fighting." Arthur nodded, the doctor's words a balm for his tormented soul. "Thank you, doctor. Please, let me know of anything." Pipoca, always on his shoulder or perched on the chair beside him, seemed to share Arthur's anxiety. The parrot was quieter, its imitations of Isabella's voice less frequent, as if it too felt the weight of the situation. While his father's health was a daily battle, the legal war against Isabella began to take shape. Arthur's lawyers, led by the relentless Dr. Helena Montero, had already filed the complaint. The scandal spread like wildfire, fueled by controlled leaks and Arthur's own reputation, which, despite being tarnished by his blindness, still commanded respect. "Isabella is incommunicado, Arthur," Dr. Helena informed him by phone, her voice firm. "She refused to receive the initial summons. She's probably trying to hide or plan a defense. But it doesn't matter. We have irrefutable proof." "And what happens now?" Arthur asked, gripping the phone. "We'll request a court order for her to appear. And of course, the media is already all over it. The story of a millionaire blinded by love who discovers his wife's cruelty against his own father is a goldmine. This will accelerate the process, but it will also be public. Are you ready for that?" Arthur looked at the hospital window where the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in orange hues. "I'm ready for whatever it takes, Dr. Montero. I just want justice for my father." He hung up, feeling a knot in his stomach. Public exposure was something he had always avoided. But now, his reputation was secondary. The truth needed to come out. There was, however, a crucial piece still missing: the briefcase. The same briefcase he had thrown into the forest in a fit of blind fury, containing his father's medicine and the irrefutable evidence of Isabella's cruelty. The image of Pipoca, shocked before the open briefcase, had been the catalyst for his epiphany. Now he needed to retrieve it. That afternoon, Arthur decided it was time. He drove back to the mansion, the silence of the car broken only by Pipoca's occasional chirps. Upon arrival, he grabbed a flashlight and a pair of gloves and headed for the forest at the back of the property. The air was cool and damp, the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves filling his lungs. The forest, once a place of tranquility, now seemed a labyrinth of shadows and regrets. He vaguely remembered the spot where he had thrown it, near an ancient oak with twisted branches. Pipoca, who had insisted on accompanying him, flew from branch to branch, watching him with its curious eyes. Arthur walked, dodging roots and bushes, the flashlight beam dancing in the darkness. Every step was a reminder of his own blindness, of the rage that had consumed him. Finally, he saw it. Semi-buried in the foliage, the dark leather briefcase lay there, a little dirty but intact. The clasp was open, exactly as he had left it. Arthur knelt, his heart pounding. He reached out, hesitant, and picked it up. As he opened it completely, the flashlight beam revealed the vials of medicine, some dented, others intact, and the envelopes with the notes and medical reports he had gathered. The evidence, the truth. Pipoca landed on his shoulder, and Arthur felt a shiver. The parrot tilted its head, looking at the contents of the briefcase, and then at Arthur, as if confirming the gravity of what lay within. "Yes, Pipoca," Arthur whispered, his voice choked. "It's all here, everything we need." He closed the briefcase with a decisive click. It wasn't just an object. It was the symbol of his redemption and the instrument of his justice. The fight was just beginning, but now Arthur had the tools to fight, and he wasn't alone. Arthur clutched the briefcase against his chest, the cold, damp leather beneath his gloves. It wasn't just an object, it was the weight of his own blindness, the irrefutable proof of a cruel betrayal, and now the key to justice. Pipoca, still on his shoulder, let out a soft chirp, like a silent echo of its own discovery. "Let's go home, friend," Arthur murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. He stood up, the briefcase firmly in his hand, and began to retrace his steps through the forest. The darkness of the night no longer seemed so oppressive. There was a new clarity in his mind, a determination that dispelled the shadows of regret. Back at the mansion, Arthur went straight to his office. He switched on the lights, revealing the cold grandeur of the room, and placed the briefcase on the imposing wooden desk. Carefully, he opened it again. The vials of medicine, the medical reports, the notes on the doses and times Isabella should have administered. Everything was there, silent witnesses to calculated neglect. He took photos with his phone, documenting each item before closing the briefcase. The first call was to Dr. Helena Montero. It was late, but Arthur knew she would understand the urgency. "Dr. Montero, it's me, Arthur. I found the briefcase. All the evidence is here, the medicine, the reports, everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Excellent, Arthur. This changes everything. We can further strengthen our case. Can you come to the office tomorrow morning? We need to review everything calmly." "I'll be there," Arthur replied, feeling palpable relief. "Thank you, Dr. Helena." The next morning, Arthur arrived at the lawyer's office with the briefcase in hand. Dr. Helena, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and an impeccable demeanor, received him with professional seriousness. He emptied the contents of the briefcase onto the conference table, explaining each item, his voice laden with a mix of anger and guilt. Dr. Helena examined the vials, prescriptions, and reports with meticulous attention. "This is irrefutable, Arthur," she said, her voice firm. "The deliberate interruption of vital medication, the malnutrition, the dehydration. With this, we can argue not only neglect, but attempted murder. The intent to cause serious harm is clear." "Attempted murder. Is it that serious?" Arthur asked. "Yes, it is, especially considering your father's vulnerability. Isabella not only hid the medicine, she actively prevented him from receiving the treatment he needed to survive. And the notes you made about the dates she discarded the medications are crucial. This shows a pattern, not an accident." "And what about public exposure?" Arthur asked, remembering her warning. "It will be intense. The story of a millionaire, his new wife, and his elderly father. It's sensational. But with this evidence, the narrative will be in your favor. Public opinion will be on your father's side. Isabella will be seen as the villain she is." Arthur nodded, swallowing hard. The shame of having been deceived still gnawed at him, but the need for justice was greater. "I'm ready for whatever it takes, Dr. Montero." As the legal machine began to turn with renewed vigor, Arthur continued his routine at the hospital. Mr. Eduardo, though still fragile, showed small signs of improvement. One day, Arthur entered the room and found his father with his eyes open, fixed on the ceiling. "Father!" Arthur called, approaching the bed. Slowly, Mr. Eduardo's eyes moved, meeting Arthur's. There was a glimmer of recognition, faint but present. He tried to lift his hand, but his strength failed him. "Don't strain yourself, Father," Arthur said, holding the aged hand. "I'm here. You're safe now." Pipoca, who had flown to the windowsill, let out a soft chirp, almost a murmur. "Hide the pot," it repeated, but this time the imitation of Isabella's voice sounded distant, almost like a memory of a nightmare that was dissipating. Arthur looked at the parrot, and then at his father. The charade was over, and the truth, though painful, was bringing with it a path to healing. Isabella, for her part, had disappeared from the mansion without a trace, but her lawyers had already been contacted by Dr. Helena's team. The legal battle would soon be waged, and Arthur was sure that, with the evidence from the briefcase and the truth on his side, justice would prevail. Arthur's redemption was intrinsically linked to his father's recovery and Isabella's punishment. He wouldn't rest until both were achieved. The legal machine began to turn with relentless speed. Dr. Helena Montero wasted no time. With the briefcase of evidence in hand, she filed a formal complaint, adding charges of attempted murder and aggravated abuse to Isabella's list of crimes. The scandal, which was already simmering, exploded. "Arthur, the media is in a frenzy," Dr. Helena informed him by phone 2 days later. "The story leaked in a controlled manner, and now there's no stopping it. Newspapers, television, news portals. Everyone wants a piece. Prepare to be the center of attention." Arthur was in his office, the empty briefcase on the desk, a constant reminder of his failure and his determination. Pipoca was perched on the chandelier, watching him with its intelligent eyes. "I'm ready, Dr. Helena," Arthur replied, his voice firm, though the knot in his stomach tightened. "Let the truth come to light." And it did. The headlines were brutal. "Millionaire uncovers wife's cruel plot against his own father. The charade of perfection. Wife accused of attempted murder by neglect. The parrot that unmasked the villain." Arthur's image, once a respected businessman, was now that of a betrayed man seeking justice. Public opinion, as Dr. Helena had predicted, was overwhelmingly on his side. The story of the parrot, Pipoca, who had warned Arthur with the phrase, "hide the pot," added an almost mythical touch to the tragedy, transforming the animal into an unexpected hero. Isabella, for her part, remained unreachable. Her lawyers, a high-profile defense team, finally spoke out, denying all accusations and claiming persecution and defamation. "They're trying to discredit you, Arthur," Dr. Helena explained. "They'll say you're doing this for revenge, that the evidence was fabricated, that the parrot is an invention. But we have the briefcase, the reports, the testimonies of the employees who saw Isabella acting strangely. They have no way to sustain that." Arthur felt the weight of public exposure, every gaze, every whisper. But each day, the image of his father in the ICU propelled him forward. Guilt still gnawed at him, but his anger towards Isabella was a potent fuel. At the hospital, Mr. Eduardo's recovery, though slow, gained momentum. One day, Arthur entered the room and found his father, not only with his eyes open, but trying to move his lips. "Father," Arthur called, approaching. Mr. Eduardo made a Herculean effort. His lips trembled, and a hoarse sound escaped. Water." Tears welled up in Arthur's eyes. "Yes, Father, water." He picked up a glass with a straw and helped him drink small sips. It was the first intelligible word his father had uttered in weeks. It was a miracle. Pipoca, perched on the IV stand, let out a chirp of joy. "Hide the pot," it repeated. But this time, Isabella's voice was almost a whisper, a distant memory without the urgency or malice. It was as if the parrot, too, was freeing itself from the trauma. "No more, Pipoca," Arthur whispered, stroking his father's hand. "No more." Dr. Elias, seeing the improvement, was cautiously optimistic. "He's responding well, Arthur. Physical therapy will be crucial now. Memory and speech might take time, but the will to live is there." The news of his father's recovery gave Arthur a new wave of hope and determination. The legal battle would be arduous, but he had the truth, the evidence, and now his father's voice beginning to return. The first preliminary hearing was scheduled. Isabella, under court order, would be compelled to appear. The anticipation was enormous. The media swarmed the courthouse doors, eager for any detail. Arthur, accompanied by Dr. Helena, faced the flashes and questions with a newfound dignity. "Mr. Arthur, what do you expect from this hearing?" a reporter asked. Arthur paused, looked directly at the cameras. "I expect justice, justice for my father, who was a victim of unthinkable cruelty, and I hope that the truth, which was revealed by a loyal friend, will prevail." He looked at Pipoca, who was on his shoulder, head held high, like a small guardian of truth. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension. When Isabella entered, escorted by her lawyers, a murmur ran through the room. She looked pale, but her posture still displayed a remnant of her former arrogance. Her eyes met Arthur's for an instant, and a flicker of hatred passed through them. Dr. Helena opened the briefcase on the table, revealing the vials of medicine and the documents. The fight was just beginning, but Arthur knew that this time he wouldn't be blind. He had the evidence, the truth, and above all, the hope that his father would make a full recovery. Redemption was within reach. The courtroom was buzzing. The air was thick with the anticipation of the media, the curious and, above all, of justice. Arthur felt the weight of all eyes on him, but his determination was unshakable. Beside him, Dr. Helena Montero displayed an impressive calm, the briefcase of evidence resting on the table, an eloquent silence. Pipoca, on his shoulder, seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment, keeping quiet, just observing with its pearly eyes. She looked pale, but her posture still displayed a remnant of her former arrogance. Her eyes met Arthur's for an instant, and a flicker of hatred passed through them, quickly replaced by a mask of indifference. The judge, a middle-aged man with an austere expression, rapped his gavel, and silence settled. "We are here for the preliminary hearing of the case involving Ms. Isabella Costa and Mr. Eduardo Mendez," he declared, his voice resonating through the room. "Dr. Montero, you may present your opening statements." Dr. Helena rose, her voice clear and firm. "Your Honor, the prosecution will present irrefutable evidence of gross negligence and attempted murder against Ms. Isabella Costa. My client, Mr. Arthur Mendez, discovered a pattern of cruel and calculated behavior on the part of the accused, which aimed to undermine the health of his father, Mr. Eduardo Mendez, a vulnerable elderly man." She opened the briefcase. The vials of medicine, the detailed medical reports, and Arthur's notes on the doses and times Isabella should have administered were methodically arranged on the table. "Here we have the vital medications that were systematically denied to Mr. Eduardo. Medical reports confirmed the deterioration of his health due to the lack of these medicines. And Mr. Arthur's notes, corroborated by testimonies from mansion employees, show a deliberate pattern of discarding and concealment." One of Isabella's lawyers, a corpulent man in an impeccable suit, rose. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is presenting allegations without concrete proof of intent. Where is the proof that Miss Costa acted in bad faith? These are just vials of medicine and notes from a resentful son." "The proof of intent, Your Honor, lies in the pattern of behavior and the devastating outcome for the victim," Dr. Helena retorted, unfazed. "Mr. Eduardo Mendez was found in critical condition, on the verge of death, due to lack of medication and basic care. Ms. Costa was solely responsible for its administration. She then turned to Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, could you tell us how you discovered this terrible truth?" Arthur stood up, his throat dry, but his eyes fixed on Isabella. "Your Honor, my father was wasting away. I was blinded by trust in my wife. But one day my parrot, Pipoca, began to insistently repeat, 'Hide the pot,' in Isabella's voice. At first I didn't understand, but the repetition, the urgency in its voice, made me suspicious." He paused, and Pipoca, as if sensing the moment, let out a soft, almost inaudible chirp. "I set a trap," Arthur continued. "I feigned a trip and caught her discarding my father's medicine in the forest. It was there that I found the briefcase, with all the vials she should have given him." Pipoca's voice, which followed me into the forest, was the final alert. It saw the open briefcase, saw the medicine, and its shock was the confirmation of the cruelty. Isabella, seated beside her lawyers, maintained an expression of disdain, but Arthur noticed an almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. Isabella's lawyer intervened again. "Your Honor, the defense alleges that Mr. Arthur Mendez is using a pet to create a fanciful narrative. A parrot cannot be a witness." "The parrot was the catalyst." "Your Honor," Dr. Helena intervened, "the evidence is material. The medicine, the reports, the notes. The parrot's voice merely revealed the truth that Ms. Costa was trying to hide." The judge listened attentively, his expression inscrutable. After a few more exchanges of arguments, he rapped his gavel again. "Given the evidence presented by the prosecution, which includes material evidence and direct testimony from Mr. Arthur Mendez, and considering the gravity of the charges, this court rules that there is sufficient evidence to proceed with the trial. Ms. Isabella Costa will remain in custody until the next hearing, without bail, due to the risk of flight and the heinous nature of the crimes." A collective gasp swept through the room. Isabella paled further, her face contorted in a mix of shock and fury. Her lawyers tried to argue, but the judge was unyielding. Arthur felt immense relief, mixed with deep sadness. Justice was beginning to be served, but the image of Isabella being led away by the bailiffs was a bitter reminder of what he had lost. Outside the courtroom, the media swarmed, thirsty for details. Arthur, with Pipoca still on his shoulder, faced the cameras. "The truth prevailed today," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "My father is recovering, and justice will be served. Let this be a lesson to all who abuse trust and vulnerability." Pipoca, as if understanding, let out a chirp and this time repeated, "Hide the pot." But Isabella's voice was now a faint, almost inaudible whisper, like a distant echo of a nightmare that was finally being exorcised. The charade had completely collapsed. Arthur's redemption was one step closer. The crowd of reporters and onlookers slowly dispersed, leaving behind a trail of dropped microphones and crumpled business cards. Arthur, with Pipoca nestled on his shoulder, felt the weight of that day drain away, replaced by a profound weariness. Dr. Helena Montero beside him seemed equally exhausted, but a discreet smile played on her lips. "A good start, Arthur," she said as they walked to the car, ignoring the last flashes. "The judge's decision was crucial. Without bail, Isabella won't have the same freedom to manipulate or flee." Arthur nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon. The image of Isabella, pale and furious, being escorted out of the courtroom still haunted him. It was a victory, yes, but it didn't bring the complete peace he expected. The wound of betrayal was still open, and the guilt of having been so blind still gnawed at him. "It's not the end, Dr. Helena," he murmured. "It's just the beginning of an even bigger battle." "And we'll be ready," she assured him, her voice firm. "We have the evidence, Arthur. The truth is on our side." The car took them to the hospital. Arthur needed to see his father. Each day, Mr. Eduardo's recovery was a small miracle. Upon entering the room, Arthur found his father more alert than ever. Mr. Eduardo's eyes followed Arthur as he approached, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. "Father," Arthur said, holding the wrinkled hand, "you're getting better every day." Mr. Eduardo squeezed his son's hand, a weak but meaningful gesture. His lips moved again. Arthur." The voice was hoarse, a whisper, but it was clear. Tears returned to Arthur's eyes. "Yes, Father. It's me. I'm here." He felt a lump in his throat. "I'm so sorry, Father. I'm so sorry for everything." Mr. Eduardo slowly shook his head, as if to say there was nothing to forgive. Pipoca, who had flown to the IV stand, watched the scene in silence, its head tilted. For the first time in a long time, the parrot didn't repeat, "Hide the pot." It was as if Isabella's absence and Eduardo's improvement had freed the animal from its torment. Dr. Elias entered the room, a medical chart in hand. "Mr. Eduardo's recovery is remarkable. Arthur, he's responding very well to physical therapy and medication. Memory is still a challenge, but communication is improving. Soon, we can start thinking about transferring him home, with intensive care, of course." The news filled Arthur with renewed hope. The idea of having his father back at the mansion under his direct care was a balm for his soul. In the days that followed, the media continued to cover the case with veracity. The story of the witness parrot and the cruel stepmother spread like wildfire, shocking public opinion. Isabella, through her lawyers, maintained the posture of a victim, claiming a conspiracy to steal her fortune and defame her name. But each day, the evidence mounted against her. Dr. Helena and Arthur met again to strategize for the main trial. "Isabella's defense will try everything," Dr. Helena explained, spreading documents on the table. "They'll try to discredit you, Arthur, claiming you're acting out of revenge, that the evidence was fabricated. They'll try to paint Mr. Eduardo as a senile, elderly man, incapable of discerning reality. And of course, they'll ridicule the idea of a parrot as a witness." Arthur clenched his fists. "It doesn't matter. I have the briefcase, the reports, the testimonies of the employees who saw her behavior. And my father is recovering. He will speak." "And that's what we need," Dr. Helena agreed. "Your father's recovery is our greatest weapon. His voice, even if weak, will be irrefutable. And Pipoca was the catalyst. He led us to the truth, and that cannot be denied." Despite the tension and uncertainty of what was to come, Arthur felt a growing strength. The guilt was still there, but his anger towards Isabella had transformed into an unwavering determination to seek justice. He looked at Pipoca, who was perched on a bookshelf, watching him with its intelligent eyes. The parrot no longer repeated the phrase that had detonated the charade. Pipoca's silence was, for Arthur, the sound of the truth finally coming to light. Isabella, meanwhile, awaited trial in a cold cell, her arrogance slowly crumbling before the harsh reality. Her lawyers fought to reverse the decision not to grant bail, but the judge remained unyielding. The mask of perfection had fallen, and now she faced the consequences of her actions. The world, which once idolized her, now saw her as the villain of a dark story. Arthur knew that the path ahead would be long and painful, but he wasn't alone. He had Dr. Helena, the truth, his father's hope, and the loyalty of a small parrot that, with a simple phrase, had uncovered unthinkable cruelty. Redemption was not just for him, but for his father's memory and for the justice he so deeply sought. The cell was cold, damp, and smelled of despair. Isabella, who had always lived surrounded by luxury and opulence, now found herself in a tiny space, with concrete walls and a hard bed. The makeup that once disguised her imperfections had vanished, revealing deep, dark circles and an unhealthy pallor. Her lawyers had tried everything to get her out, but the judge had been unyielding. No bail. The word echoed in her mind like a sentence. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The arrogance that had defined her for so long began to disintegrate, replaced by a chilling fear. The outside world, which once idolized her, now saw her as the villain. Newspapers plastered her photo with cruel headlines about the cruel stepmother and the witness parrot. The idea of a parrot uncovering her charade was humiliating, a bad joke the media loved. Arthur, that blind idiot, she muttered to herself, her voice hoarse. He'll pay for this. All of them will. But even as she uttered the threats, the conviction in her words faltered. The reality was that she was trapped, and Arthur, the man she thought she had under her control, had become her tormentor. While Isabella languished in her cell, Arthur and Dr. Helena met in the lawyer's office, the table covered with documents and reports. The morning light streamed through the windows, but the atmosphere was tense. Isabella's defense will be aggressive, Arthur, Dr. Helena explained, pointing to a passage in a report. They'll try to discredit you, Arthur, claiming you're acting out of revenge, that the evidence was fabricated. They'll try to paint Mr. Eduardo as a senile elderly man, incapable of discerning reality, and that his notes are the result of delusions. Arthur clenched his fists, rage bubbling up. They can't do that. My father is recovering. He's not senile. Oh, they'll try, Dr. Helena retorted, her voice calm but firm. And of course they'll ridicule the idea of a parrot as a witness. They'll say it's a charade, a desperate attempt to create a sensational narrative. It doesn't matter, Arthur said, his voice laden with determination. I have the briefcase, the reports, the testimonies of the employees who saw her behavior, and my father. He will speak. He will be our greatest proof. Dr. Helena nodded, a gleam of approval in her eyes. And that's what we need. Your father's recovery is our greatest weapon. And Pipoca. Pipoca was the catalyst. He led us to the truth, and that cannot be denied. The repetition of the phrase, "hide the pot," in her voice is powerful circumstantial evidence, which contextualizes the material proofs. That same day, Arthur visited his father at the hospital. Mr. Eduardo was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the movement outside. His skin had regained some color, and his eyes, once dull, now had a more vivid sparkle. "Father," Arthur said, approaching, "how are you feeling today?" Mr. Eduardo slowly turned his head, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "Better, my son, much better." His voice was still a whisper, but clearer, more present. I remember you, and Pipoca." "Yes, father, Pipoca is here." The parrot, who had flown to the IV stand, let out a soft chirp as if confirming, "He missed you so much." Dr. Elias entered the room with a satisfied smile. "Mr. Eduardo's improvement is impressive, Arthur. Physical therapy is greatly helping with motor recovery, and speech therapy is doing wonders. Short-term memory is still a challenge, but long-term memory is returning. Soon, we can start thinking about transferring him home, with intensive care, of course." He knew that the path ahead would be long and painful, but each day, justice seemed closer. Pipoca, perched on Arthur's office bookshelf later, watched the man with its intelligent eyes. Pipoca's silence was, for Arthur, the sound of the truth finally coming to light, a harbinger of peace after the storm. He wasn't alone. The trial was approaching, and Arthur was ready for the final battle. The day of the trial dawned grey, with a fine drizzle that seemed to wash the city, but not the dirt that would be exposed in court. Arthur arrived early, accompanied by Dr. Helena, his expression serious and focused. The courthouse entrance was surrounded by a crowd of journalists and onlookers, all eager for a glimpse of the cruel stepmother and the witness parrot. Camera flashes exploded, microphones were extended, and questions were fired from all sides. Arthur, head held high, ignored the commotion, his eyes fixed on his objective. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was dense. The benches were packed, and the murmuring ceased when the judge entered. Arthur sat beside Dr. Helena, feeling the weight of that moment. His eyes swept the room until they found Isabella seated at the defense table. She was visibly different. The luxury of before had been replaced by a sober suit, and heavy makeup gave way to a pallor that couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Still, there was a remnant of her former arrogance in her gaze, a veiled challenge that Arthur didn't let go unnoticed. The trial began with opening statements. Dr. Helena, with her clear and authoritative voice, presented the case forcefully. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you will hear a story of unimaginable cruelty, of a woman who, driven by greed, tried to steal the life of a vulnerable elderly man. You will see the evidence of premeditated neglect, of hidden medications, of a charade maintained for months. And yes, you will hear the testimony of a creature that, with a simple phrase, uncovered the whole truth. The parrot Pipoca. She described the discovery of the briefcase in the forest, the discarded medicine vials, the medical reports that attested to Mr. Eduardo's improvement after the intervention. The defense will try to discredit my client, Arthur, and paint Mr. Eduardo as a senile elderly man. But the truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that Mr. Eduardo's recovery is living proof that he was a victim of a heinous crime, and Pipoca's voice repeating, "Hide the pot," in the accused's voice is not a joke, but the warning cry of a loyal witness. Next, it was Isabella's lawyer's turn, Dr. Ricardo Mendez. He was a corpulent man with a grave voice and an air of superiority. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution will present you with a sensationalist narrative based on assumptions and a parrot. My client, Ms. Isabella, is a woman of unimpeachable reputation, a victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by a resentful and ambitious stepson. Arthur, Mr. Eduardo's son, always envied his father's fortune and Isabella's influence. He fabricated evidence, manipulated employees, and yes, trained a parrot to repeat a phrase he himself invented, all to incriminate an innocent woman and inherit his father's fortune. Dr. Mendez tried to paint Arthur as a villain, a man blinded by revenge and money. He claimed that Mr. Eduardo, due to his advanced age and health condition, was prone to delusions and that his notes were invalid. The idea of a parrot as a witness is an insult to the intelligence of this court. It's a charade, a desperate attempt to divert attention from Arthur's true motivation: greed. Arthur felt his blood boil. The lawyer's words were a direct attack on his honor and his father's memory. He clenched his fists under the table, but Dr. Helena placed a hand on his arm, a subtle gesture to calm him. "Don't react," she whispered. "It's exactly what they want." Isabella, for her part, watched Arthur with a sneer, a flame of triumph in her eyes. She still believed she could reverse the situation, that her facade of perfection, even if cracked, would still protect her. The first day of the trial was long and exhausting. Witnesses were called, documents were presented, and the tension in the room was almost palpable. Arthur knew that the path would be arduous, but the image of his father recovering, Pipoca's voice in his mind, and the briefcase with the irrefutable evidence gave him the strength to continue. The battle for justice had only just begun. The second day of the trial began with the prosecution calling Arthur to testify. He walked to the witness stand, his posture erect, his heart pounding. Dr. Helena guided him with precise questions, allowing him to narrate the story from the beginning: the suspicion, the trap, the discovery of the briefcase in the forest. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Arthur began, his voice firm, "I loved Isabella. I trusted her. But the way my father was wasting away, the way Pipoca started repeating, "Hide the pot," in her voice. Something was wrong. I couldn't ignore it. He described the night he feigned the trip, the anguish of seeing Isabella discarding his father's medicine. I followed her into the forest. I saw her throw the briefcase. When I opened it and saw the vials, my father's medical reports, his notes, the truth hit me like a lightning bolt. Dr. Helena then requested that the briefcase be presented as evidence. An officer brought it, and Arthur opened it, revealing the intact medicine vials, the detailed medical reports, and Mr. Eduardo's trembling notes. Here they are, ladies and gentlemen, the medicines my father needed to live, discarded as trash. The reports showing the deterioration of his health while these medicines were suppressed, and his notes, the last vestiges of his lucidity, recording the cruelty he suffered. Isabella watched, her face pale, but still maintaining an expression of disdain. Dr. Mendez tried to discredit Arthur, questioning his motivation, suggesting he had fabricated the evidence to inherit the fortune. "Aren't you simply seeking revenge, Mr. Arthur? Isn't this a desperate attempt to incriminate your wife and take control of your father's assets?" Arthur looked directly at Isabella, then at the jury. "My only motivation is justice for my father. I don't need his fortune. I need him to be alive and well, and the proof that I'm not lying lies in his recovery. My father is recovering. Ladies and gentlemen, he's coming back to life because now he's receiving the care and medicine that Isabella deprived him of." The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Helena then made a bold move. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution would like to present crucial circumstantial evidence which contextualizes all the material evidence we have just seen. An audio recording of the parrot Pipoca repeating the phrase it heard incessantly. An audio technician played the recording. Isabella's voice, clear and unmistakable, echoed through the room. "Hide the pot! Hide the pot!" The repetition was almost hypnotic, the phrase imprinting itself on everyone's minds. Isabella paled further, her gaze fixed on the floor, her arrogance finally crumbling. The climax came with Mr. Eduardo's testimony. He entered the courtroom, supported by a nurse, walking slowly to the witness stand. His white hair, his aged face, but his eyes now held a sparkle of clarity and determination. The room fell completely silent. "Mr. Eduardo," Dr. Helena asked softly, "do you remember what happened during the period when Isabella was your caregiver?" Mr. Eduardo took a deep breath, his voice still weak but audible. I remember the darkness, the weakness. I remember Isabella. She always smiled, but her eyes were cold. She said I was taking my medicine, but I knew I wasn't. I felt it. I wrote it down. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget." He looked at Isabella, a look of sadness and disappointment. "She wanted to see me die." Mr. Eduardo's words hit the room like thunder. Isabella, unable to contain her emotion, began to cry silently, makeup streaking down her face. Her lawyer, Dr. Mendez, tried to question Mr. Eduardo's lucidity, but the clarity of his answers, the coherence of his narrative, dismantled any claim of senility. "I am not senile," Mr. Eduardo said, his voice gaining a tone of dignity. "I am a man who was betrayed, but I am here, and I am recovering, thanks to my son, and to Pipoca." The jury deliberated for only a few hours. The evidence was overwhelming. The briefcase, the medical reports, Pipoca's recording, and, above all, Mr. Eduardo's irrefutable testimony. The verdict was unanimous, guilty. Isabella was sentenced to a long prison term. The news spread quickly, and headlines now celebrated justice. The cruel stepmother convicted. The hero parrot reveals the truth. Months passed. The mansion, once the stage for a dark drama, now breathed a new peace. Mr. Eduardo had returned home, under the care of dedicated nurses and, most importantly, his loving son. His recovery was remarkable. He walked more steadily, his voice was stronger, and he spent hours in the garden, reading and enjoying Arthur's company. Pipoca, the little hero, was always nearby. It no longer repeated, "Hide the pot." Instead, it perched on Mr. Eduardo's shoulder, letting out soft chirps, as if celebrating the life it had helped save. Arthur, though still bearing the scars of betrayal, found redemption in his father's recovery and the justice he had sought. He spent afternoons with Mr. Eduardo, talking, laughing, rebuilding the bonds that had almost been broken. Life at the mansion had changed. The opulence remained, but now it was filled with love, care, and truth. And at the center of it all, an elderly man who had been rescued from darkness, a son who had found his purpose, and a parrot that, with a simple phrase, had uncovered unthinkable cruelty, bringing light where before there had only been shadow. Justice had prevailed, and peace finally reigned. The end